Good evening, everyone. It is so good to speak with you in the town halls. I always run into constituents at the grocery store or other places, and they tell me how they enjoy these town halls, and I always enjoy speaking with you. I wanted to do this town hall because the student loan issue, I know, has been a critical issue in our district from, oh my goodness, from the time I became a member of Congress. And at different points in time, we've had in-person town halls and workshops to work on your specific issues with your specific loans. But we all know what President Biden did, and we're going to talk about that. We are so fortunate to have two experts who are with us today on the call who will be able to answer your questions about student loans. Let me introduce our guests, and let me just thank them so much for taking the time to be on this call. I know so many constituents have questions, and we want to just get right to it. We're going to ask them to do a presentation and then get right to your questions. Our first expert is Daria Jimenez from UC Irvine Law School, and Devon Graves, formerly of UCLA, and now is at Cal State Stanislaus. So, Daria, why don't you take it away?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I want to tell you about the thing you might have heard in the news recently, the $10,000 or $20,000 in forgiveness or cancellation of federal student loans that President Biden announced as an executive action that will apply to people whose single income is $125,000 or less, or whose joint household income is $250,000 or less. And the difference between the 10 and the 20 is if the person ever took out a Pell Grant, whether that was as an undergrad, just at any point in time. Those who had a Pell Grant, which were people who were particularly needy at the time received the Pell Grant, were particularly needy at that time, they will get up to $20,000 in cancellation. And that will apply to all federal loans that are currently held by the Department of Education, which you can check by going to the National Student Loan Clearinghouse database. If you search for those words, National Student Loan Clearinghouse, you can get a login and see what student loans you have. If you have loans that are held by the federal government, then when the program rolls out, which we're being told is through an application that will be available in October, you'll be able to apply and basically submit proof of evidence that your income qualifies. And then once that's processed, basically the amounts will be reduced. I want to turn it for a second to Professor Graves, because I think he might have had some more to say on this bit.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Congressmember Beck, for the opportunity. I want to also highlight some of the other key aspects that came out of this was undergraduate loans. If you have undergraduate loans, they can cap repayment at 5% of monthly income. And the student loan payment pause has been extended through December 31st, 2022, which means that payments will resume in 2023. Also, more importantly, tied to this is information about public service loan forgiveness. That has been a huge reform undertaking by this government, and the Department of Education has announced limited time changes to PSLF that have a deadline in October for borrowers who worked in military, federal, state, tribal, or local governments or nonprofits at any point can have some of those payments count towards public service loan forgiveness. So this is a lot of reform, a lot of change, and I'm looking forward to participating and answering the questions so that folks have the information they need to go about making the best decisions for themselves.
Yeah, and I want to just add to that there is a lot of information, a lot of changes that are ongoing, and the Department of Education is suggesting that everyone sign up for their sort of email alerts on student loans information in particular, and that website is ed, like education, ed.gov, government, /subscriptions, SUBSC, RIPTIONS, subscriptions, like email subscriptions. And the very first thing, there's a bunch of things you can sign up for, but the very first one is about student loan announcements. And so if you sign up there for an email, you will receive information when the application, for example, for the student loan forgiveness of 10 or 20,000, when that becomes available, you will receive more information when the income-driven repayment caps are actually effective, that Professor Graves talked about. And so I would highly recommend doing that, because any time that there's a change, for instance, right now the payment pause will end on December 31st. It's not likely to be extended, but if it were extended, it would be, you would get an announcement through that. The last thing I'll say on this, or another thing I'll say, I guess, is that the pause is going to end on December 31st, which means sometime in January, if you have a federal student loan, bills will begin to come in. The best thing I can suggest to anyone in that situation is to sign up for an income-driven repayment plan. And there's another website here that will help you do that, studentaid.gov/IDR, studentaid.gov/IDR, which stands for income-driven repayment. And it's a complicated mess of payment plans that are potentially available to you. But the tool at that website helps you figure out what is available, because not all loans are eligible for all types of repayment plans, and what is, what's the best choice for you to lower your monthly payments. If you do this before December 31st, then whenever your first bill arrives, you will then begin with that new payment amount and not the standard repayment amount, which is almost always higher than whatever income-driven repayment would have done for you. And just so you know, some people may actually qualify for a $0 income-driven repayment because essentially, you don't have enough income per the various programs, to pay your student loans. And so you will be able to pay $0 or pay nothing at all, so long as you have certified your income and done the application for IDR. So I highly recommend doing that before December 31st.
Thank you both so much. And let me just take a step back and give you a proper introduction. Professor Jimenez of UC Irvine Law School. Professor Jimenez spent a year as part of the founding staff of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which I don't know if you were there during the years that Trump and the Republicans went after and tried to eviscerate the consumer part of the.
I was. Trump was not there at the time I was there, but certainly from the very beginning, it was a hard slog.
I appreciate you and the work that you've done.
Thank
Professor
you.
Jimenez currently directs the UCI Student Loan Law Initiative that aims to think deeply yet practically about the future of student loans and education financing. And Professor Jimenez, if it doesn't take us too much off the mark, I'm always amazed at understanding that how much money the government makes from student loans, and I've never quite understood why we make money off of our young people. Our second guest, Professor Graves, was nice enough to have spoken at Taco Tuesday that we held a few years ago. That was a specific event, in-person event that we held talking about student loans a few years ago. And then at UCLA, his research focuses on community colleges, financial aid, race, and racism. And fortunately, another example of our bubble, I'm sure that Professor Graves is not having to struggle with CRT, critical race theory, which has turned into a boogeyman and is just really a way for people to say they don't want full U.S. history taught. You can actually teach about race and racism at UCLA. And since you've joined the faculty at Cal State Stanislaus in the Department of Advanced Studies in Education, you've also were appointed by the governor to serve on two of California's higher education governing boards, the Student Aid Commission, which administers $2 billion in state financial aid programs, and you were a student regent. So why don't we move to questions? And I would ask our moderator if you could please, we were going to begin with a poll question, as we always do, and then I will read some questions for our guest.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We'll get to those polls here. Want to remind everyone to get in line with your question, comment, concern. Please press 0. Now, to get us started off, poll question, we want to know, do you have student loan debt? Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. Again, the discussion of the night, do you have student loan debt? Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. While everyone weighs in there, I'll turn this back to you, Congressmember.
Great. So the first question is, will private lenders funded loans qualify with the loan forgiveness bill, or is it only federal loans? And let me read another question. What's the difference between student loan relief and Pell Grants? If you already have loans and they're only forgiven up to $10,000 to $20,000, what happens in the future?
Do you want to? I can.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah. So what's the difference? I mean, the first one, I think they're related, but not exactly. So the cancellation of $10,000 or $20,000 only applies to loans that the Department of Education essentially controls or are due to them. Right? The Department of Education is actually one of the largest banks in the world. It only does student loans. It does about $40 billion. 45 million people that have accounts, quote unquote, at the bank, at the Department of Education, and $1.6 trillion of debt that it holds. And so it only refers to those private lenders. The Department of Education can't do anything about that. That would need to be Congress through appropriation. So unfortunately, only Department of Education or federal loans can qualify. And then the Pell Grant is a grants program that, basically, I believe it only applies to undergrad. But it's for people who fill out the FAFSA, the free aid, federal student aid financial application, and basically don't make enough money. Them and their family, and it even considers assets. They receive a grant, for their studies, and then of course eligibility to get federal student loans.
And
I think I answered all of them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if I could just tag along, Professor Jimenez, if you receive the Pell Grant at any time, so one time, all throughout your time in higher education as an undergraduate, you would be eligible for debt relief at the $20,000 amount. So that's why knowing that you receive the Pell Grant will help you understand the difference between the $10,000 and the $20,000 in debt relief.
That's right. So the people who at any point at all received the Pell Grant, even if you were an undergrad, but all your loans were graduate loans or something like that. The $10,000 and $20,000 cancellation announcement, I just want to make clear, applies to all federal loans, and that doesn't matter what kind of federal loans they are, in the sense that they could have been taken out for undergraduate studies, for a certificate program, for a 2-year program, for a graduate program. That doesn't matter. It also doesn't matter how much you owe on them, and it doesn't matter how old they are. So all of those things, what matters is the income qualification, $125,000 for an individual, or $250,000 for a two-person household, and those times that will be for 2020 or 2021 is what the administration has said. So the lowest of those two, and the only thing that matters between the 10 and 20 is the Pell Grant, having received the Pell Grant before.
And
I have
also,
another question. Go ahead.
I was just going to tack on one area of relief is for the Parent Plus loan. So for any of our callers who help support their children go to college and took out that Parent Plus loan, and you meet the income thresholds, you will be eligible for loan forgiveness on the Parent Plus loan as well. And if you yourself, as a student, receive the Pell Grant, you would be eligible for up to $20,000 in relief on the Plus loan as well.
Oh, well, thank you, Professor Graves, because I was just going to ask you about Parent Plus loans and whether or not parents actually can get relief. And your answer to that is yes. Another question is there any relief for educators? There is a Carrie Thorne from Pasadena. She has student debt. She was an early childhood educator, and she wants to know, is there any forgiveness for educators?
Yeah, so the thing I want to say that most importantly right now, because it's time limited, is that the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which has existed since 2007, but has gotten a bad rap, fairly. It's had a bad rap because very few people have actually been able to get through it, given that the barriers basically in terms of all the requirements that people had to meet in order to have a payment or a month that they were in payment count. Well, there is a limited waiver of many of those requirements that is currently in effect that expires as October 31st. And October 31st is a date by which you have to do at least two things in order to make your previous employment at a public service employer, and that means government, schools, or any nonprofit, any 501c3. And it doesn't matter what your role was. What matters at those jobs, what matters is what your employer was, whether your employer is a public service employer. So you don't have to be a teacher. You can just work at a school, or, in any level of government, or any nonprofit. So those people who are in those situations, they may have payments. They may think, many of them, in fact, I talked to them and they say, oh, I already tried that, the public service loan forgiveness, and I was told, my services told me I wasn't eligible. I was in the wrong plan. My loans weren't eligible. And so basically I gave up. Well, during this very limited time until October 31st, you can apply for the waiver to count many of your previous employment history as a payment, including the entire 2.5 years or so that we have been, the federal student loan payments have been paused. That entire time period, even though you have not had to pay any money, and you probably haven't paid any money, that entire time period can count as a payment, in quotes, for purposes of the public service loan forgiveness, which at the end of the day, in order to get the forgiveness, it requires that you make, or that you have 120 months of qualifying payments. So it's about 36 months that will count, just if you were employed during that time for someone like the caller that we were talking about, for someone in education. And the website to look for that, and to start the application is studentaid.gov/PSLF, Public Service Loan Forgiveness. You have to apply. If you have certain kinds of federal loans, you may have to consolidate your federal loans, which is a step that takes several days. And that, the PSLF, the studentaid.gov/PSLF website will tell you that. You may need to do that before October 31st, and you would also need to get your employer, current employer or previous employer, that you had to basically submit a form saying that you work there, at least part-time, at least 4 to 30 hours, that you worked there for whatever the period was, so that those periods can be counted for your public service loan forgiveness total. And I actually know a lot of people who thought it was totally hopeless for them, and they submitted all the paperwork, and it took about 6 months, for it to, and it may take a little longer as more people are submitting it towards the end of the deadline, but they submitted all the paperwork, and now they have no more student debt, because all these payments in the past were counted.
Okay, I'm going to read another. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Professor.
Sorry, Congress member. I just wanted to make sure to plug again, as Professor Jimenez was talking about applying for public service loan forgiveness, don't forget that you have to apply for the student debt relief as well. And so that application will become live through the Department of Education. That's why it's important to sign up for the subscription. So again, the ed.gov/subscriptions. So you can see when that application becomes live, so you can submit your application. So don't forget that applying for public service loan forgiveness and the student debt relief are two separate applications.
Okay, I'm going to read another question from Joe in LA. Hopefully the screen will stay still. I'm confused about the forbearance income-driven. I'm confused about the forbearance income-driven plan. I heard something about that lenders should have done it on the income-driven plan, but did forbearance instead. and that loans should have been canceled by now. Is any of that true? How can I apply for forgiveness as well? I'm over 25 years out of college, and I should have had enough years to qualify for zero income payment, but I was put on forbearance, which was difficult, different lending rules. I hope our professors can understand that question.
I think I don't know exactly, but I have a guess, which is there have been repeated, when I was at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we sued Navient and other servicers for putting people in forbearance instead of driving them into income different repayment, where they would also have a $0 repayment, but this would be much better for their credit, and it would count for things like public service loan forgiveness. What's not clear from the question is whether this person is actually eligible for public service loan forgiveness, which would have meant that they, in these 25 years, they worked at least 120 months. Doesn't have to be continuous, but at least 120 months, for a public service employer. It is true that outside of this time-limited waiver, you could not be in forbearance and have a month count for the 120. So you could have been in the right employer, but if you were in forbearance, the regular rules of PSLF are very draconian. And basically you could not, even though that was the wrong place to put most people and the servicers did it, unlawfully, you would not have that payment count. But if the person is in this situation and they apply for the waiver, then they actually, this payment would count. All the forbearance payments, everything but in-school deferment, basically. So graduate students, who were also working as PAs or something, they wouldn't be able to benefit from this because they would be in school deferment. But forbearance, delinquent at times, periods where you made less than a full payment, all of these things are waived during this waiver. But again, you have to apply studentaid.gov/PSLF, and that application may require consolidation, which takes some time. So I would do this ASAP, because October 31st is the deadline, but there will be steps that will take you beyond that if you start too late. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say, actually, I'm sorry. Can I say one? I think this will be really important, and I doubt anybody will ask the question, which is, we have been, since March 2020, we have been, if federal student loans have been paused, payments have been paused, you haven't had to pay any money if you had a Department of Education student loan, and your interest has not grown during this time, which has been, fantastic for people. Those payments, that pause period is going to restart on January 1st. During if you made any payments during the period of the pause, if you had auto payments going out, or if you paid off your loan, as I've talked to some people, they paid off their loan in this period, you can call your servicer, that is whoever it is that you actually made the payment to, whatever company, Mohila, Nelnet, Navient, any of them that you made the payment to, and request a refund. And they need to give you a refund if what you had was a loan that would have been subject to the pause, but you made payment. So this is a time in which you can actually get these payments back, and especially if you're in the situation where actually the cancellation is going to erase, $10,000 or $20,000, and that would make a difference, perhaps erase your entire student debt, you can get some of that money back. But you have to do it before December 31st. And again, what to do is to call your servicer.
Some people have asked, they have applied and they want to know, they haven't gotten any response, so they're not even sure that their application has been accepted. What do you do after you apply on the website?
I assume they're talking. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries, Professor Jimenez. I just was answering the question in terms of there is an influx of folks on accessing these things, so it's looking like 4 to 6 weeks of time for reviewing applications. So the first piece of advice is continuing to check in with your servicer to see if there's any updates to your account. Professor Jimenez, is there anything else that you would add on to that?
Yeah, I would say So I'm assuming this is a PSLF application, Public Service Loan Forgiveness, because the other application for the cancellation hasn't yet been released. But the answer is probably similar, which is it will take some time. You should have received, though, something through the web anyway that basically, you have submitted the application. If you haven't heard anything, you can actually contact the Department of Education at 1-800-4-FED-AID. I should have the number, it's FEDAID. I don't have the actual numbers, I'm sorry. Oh wait, 433-3243. 1-800-433-3243. Or you can actually chat with a live agent on their website, studentaid.gov. And basically ask them if they have at least received your application. I am hearing that people are getting automated letters sent fairly quickly after they apply, even though the information in those letters may actually be incorrect. It may actually say you've been denied. And, if you do get one of those letters, call the number that is stated there. That will be from your servicer. But it's taking, months for these applications to actually be processed. So long as you get it in and you know that they've gotten it before October 31st, you should be fine in the sense that you can later add more information or correct any information, but you would have been gotten in by the deadline.
So Karen from View Park says she went online to the student loan website and was trying to see if she qualified for the PSLF forgiveness. There was a tool there where she had to put in an EIN number, and she worked for a tribal something, which is federal. I couldn't get anywhere on the site. What can I do?
So that's the PSLF tool, studentaid.gov/PSLF. And that, it does require, it doesn't require it. It's easier for them. And so it really tries to steer you into typing essentially the tax ID number of your employer. That's what an EIN is, employer identification number. And then from there, it kind of auto-populates a form that you then give to your employer to verify that you worked there for the period of time that you're saying. If you can't, people have had success basically Googling their employer and EIN or asking their employer directly what is their tax ID number. It's not a secret number or anything like that. The tool has some numbers if you just search by names, but it definitely doesn't have everyone. And it might even have incorrect information, is what I've been told, unfortunately. But if you have the number from your employer, or from some public record of your employer, like, through Google, like if it's a public, if it's a public employer, you should be able to find it, then that's where to start. That's what to do. And if you're having trouble, the number I gave earlier, the 1-800-433-3243 for FedAid, that number is the Department of Education's Federal Student Aid, which is the department the part of the Department of Education that handles federal student loans. And so that's a person that works for the Department of Education that should be able to give you a lot more guidance.
I have a question here about an individual who has 2 loans in default and is in the income-driven program. She contracted her services, and they had her complete an application, and they told her it would take up to 10 days before they could process the application. She wants to know how she can get her loans out of default, and if she's even starting in the right place. I don't know if the new policy assists people who are in default, does it?
I don't have the answer to that question. I think there is a way to get out of default. That's the typical way. I guess I don't know if there's anything special. I'm not aware of anything special right now. But being an income-driven repayment, again, that means you've gotten out. You can't be an income-driven repayment and be in default. So if the servicer gave them the application, Professor Graves, you go ahead.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Professor Jimenez. I just wanted to
make
sure to note that defaulted loans are eligible for the student loan debt relief. So don't forget about that, folks. If you're defaulted loans, you're still eligible if you meet that income threshold. So don't give up hope in terms of having defaulted loans.
Can we ask our next poll question now?
Absolutely. And as we get ready to do our next poll question, I want to let everyone know, I know that we are reading out a lot of links to different resources during this call. You can visit our website, that's vas.house.gov/student loan info, which will have most of, if not all, of the links mentioned on this call. So again, this is just Congressmember Karen Bass' website, vas.house.gov/student loan info. So a lot of those links and resources that we've discussed on this call will be on that page. So polling question, as promised, would you be interested in attending an in-person student loan debt resource fair? Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. So again, we want to know if you would be interested in attending an in-person student loan debt resource fair. Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. Back to you, Congressmember.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to ask a question from Justin from Redondo Beach, a brilliant young man who started his student debt in college when he was 13. He got a $7,000 loan, but he didn't even know about signing for that loan. His credit score went way down, and he's wondering if there's any way that can be rectified. And he also wants to know how could he have even signed for a loan at 13. He skipped 4 grades and graduated the University of Penn at 15, but he's wondering if he qualifies for debt relief. That's quite an interesting one.
That is I teach contracts as well. And in general, 13-year-olds are not by themselves eligible to enter into loans in the sense that the loans shouldn't be held against them. If the lender wants to give them money, that's sort of on them.
Wouldn't his parents have to co-sign? Wouldn't his parents, if you are underage, like if you're 17 or 16 and you're in college, can you actually sign legally?
They might, when you're that close, they might let you do it in the sense that you will, it gets complicated. But basically 13 is very young. And if the parents didn't sign anything, the problem is that this isn't recent. And so this person has probably made payments already. And so it's because it sounds like they're, from a while ago. So they are eligible for, all the things we have discussed. But is there any specific relief for having taken out the loans at 13? I don't think so, unfortunately.
Okay. Gabrielle from Palm said that her husband went to culinary school that is no longer in existence, and now we're still paying on this debt through Navient. Do these loans qualify? Another person, Christine, has asked, she has a daughter that just started college. She wants to know, will this plan be available in the coming years, or is it just for this year? I can answer that one. It's just for this year. We do need to make sure that we have another president we need to make sure that we keep a Democrat in the White House, in the Senate, and in the House. Otherwise, this will be the last time this happens. So this is a very political thing, and Republicans are not supportive of this. So how about that other question about the culinary school?
The culinary school that closed. So there is a separate program we haven't talked about yet called the Borrower Defense Rule that applies to people who went to schools that closed or just closed for any reason, or that closed for basically lying or defrauding their students. So think of your Corinthians, your ITT Tech, those schools. So this culinary school may be one of those or not, but it is very complicated. For people who went to Corinthian or ITT Tech or any of the very large ones that the department itself essentially shut down, it is a little easier. But I would suggest this person go to the studentaid.gov/borrower defense, DORROWER /defense. And you basically apply for borrower defense there, and that could mean a total forgiveness of the student loans that were taken out to attend that school or partial forgiveness. And so it's a separate program that obviously only applies to people who are in these situations. But it's definitely very worthwhile for the person to do this, even if they might get otherwise, the 10 or 20,000 as well.
Lori Harvey wants to know is there any tax implications for participating in this program?
So right now there is not. So doing this should not impact federal taxes. So it's still not clear about the state implications for state taxes, but there are not implications for federal taxes, and that's another great thing about this reform that's taking place.
And there's a couple of people that are asking questions that are in their 60s. One individual is trying to. I lost it. Let's see. She's 62 years old. Her financial status has decreased. She still has a student loan. Did she have to make a certain amount of payments before she can get forgiveness? Another individual who is in their 60s wants to continue her education, and she has 40 to 50,000 in student loans, and she wants to. Does she qualify if she is trying to go on for her PhD? Does she, even though she's still in school and will go on to get her master's?
If we're talking about the 10 or 20,000, not only does she qualify, but if she's recently in school, as in the last 2 years, that means she filled out a FAFSA in the last 2 years, that federal application for student aid, then the forgiveness may actually happen automatically. The department has said that the president of the Department of Education has said that up to 8 million people will have their balances reduced automatically because they have enough income information from them, enough recent income information that they can just do that administratively. Those people will not need to apply. So that's great. If she is actually going to school, the age of the person, doesn't matter. The age of the loan doesn't matter. Whether or not you've ever made a payment doesn't matter. So I think both of those callers would actually, other things matter, like having a federal student loan. But if they're in that situation, then the things they described as potential issues, I don't think are.
Well, here's a sad one. The vet wants to know, she's in her 60s, and she says if she were to pass before these loans are paid off, would my family then take on the remainder?
That is a sad question, but there is a not sad answer, I guess. No. For federal student debt, there is a death discharge when the person dies. And in general, there's a death discharge to the debt the government just gives up altogether. But in general, any debt that is really one person's debt, the dead deceased person's debt, is not the other people. It's not their estate. It's not their inheritors. Their family members are not going to have to pay that debt. The estate, that is the remainder assets that person has, may need to pay it. But it's important to know as a family member of someone who passes away that you don't, you may get calls from debt collectors being like, oh, you need to pay your parents or your siblings or, whatever is debt, but you really don't. You're not on the hook for that debt. It may be, depending on very complicated laws, that, you don't get to inherit as much because some of whatever you might have inherited needs to be used to pay, the creditors. But it doesn't have to come out of your own personal money ever.
Well, I can just say that I went through for years. My daughter passed away, and they tried to collect from me, even though I had not co-signed on her loans, and they came after me for years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that other people experience that. They basically try to trick you to see if they can get you to pay it back. They make you think that you might be obligated even when you're not.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a real issue.
So my Marie Bright is saying her granddaughter has a student loan through the local bank. Will she qualify for this loan forgiveness? Also, are there any plans to lower the interest rates on these loans to help people pay them off more efficiently?
So to answer that question, a private loan would not be eligible for the student debt relief, and there is still conversations about reform in regards to interest rates. But as a reminder, your undergraduate loan repayments on undergraduate debt can be capped at 5% of income. So that's still ongoing conversations there. And I also wanted to circle back on to public service loan forgiveness. So folks who are still have 10 years of payments to go, and you haven't applied for public service loan forgiveness and started that process, you can begin that process right away. So having your servicer have your servicer, who currently will be Mohelia, who is administering or servicing all public service loan forgiveness, you can start that process by getting your employment certification form going and keeping track of that throughout your 10 years and keeping track of those 120.
Did we lose the professor?
I wanted to add something, so I just, hopefully he can jump back on. I wanted to add on that, just to stress that, because I think we didn't make it so clear, that the public service loan forgiveness waiver, the program continues, it's ongoing since 2007. The waiver, this limited time in which you don't have to meet the onerous requirements that otherwise existed, that period allows you to basically add more months to the total count, the 120 month count that is needed for actual forgiveness. And by forgiveness, public service loan forgiveness is an erasure of all the remaining debt, whatever that is, whatever that amount is, the entirety of it after the 120, what are called qualifying payments. If right now you don't have 120, you haven't worked 10 years in public service, you maybe have only been out of school 1 year, but you have been working in public service, you should still apply for the waiver, because at the very least, the last 2.5 years of $0 payments because of the student loan payment pause, that last 2.5 years would count towards, if you were working for a public service employer, that would count towards 120. So you might not get, if you haven't been working 10 plus years in public service, you're not going to get all your loans erased, but you would get the count of the number of months that you have eligible for public service increased. So it is still worthwhile, even if you're not, if you haven't been out very long, if you have been working for, again, any nonprofit whatsoever, 501c3, any 501c3, a government, a school, for the last, any time since 2007, which is when the public service loan forgiveness program began. You should do that waiver, which again is at studentaid.gov/PSLF.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I believe there's one other announcement from our moderator about people who want us to contact them during the blackout period. If you would like to go ahead and make that announcement.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Congressmember. That is very simple right now. If you would like to be contacted by the Office of Congressmember Karen Dass during this blackout period, simply press 1 right now on the keypad on your phone. Again, get that keypad out, pressing 1, and that simply lets us continue to stay in contact with you, continue to keep you updated with what's going on right now. Back to you, Congressmember. Oh, and one more thing, actually, I'm going to jump in and repeat that website one last time. Sorry, forgot to do that. bass.house.gov, just our regular website, bass.house.gov/student loan info. Tons of information there. Go check it out. Everything, hopefully, mostly, if not everything from tonight, will be on that website. Now back to you, Congressmember.
Absolutely. So it's our goal to have a tape of this telephone town hall on the website, because we know we gave you so much information. And, as always, whenever there's something that happens in D.C. that impacts you, that's a hot button issue, I always like to do these town halls. Because we're close to the election, I won't be able to do another one until after the election, but we will certainly do one immediately after. Let me just thank Professor Jimenez and Professor Graves. I'd like to ask both of you if there's any closing comments that you have, but I just want to thank you so much for your time, because this is such a complicated stressful issue for constituents. And both of you have so much information and clarity to give, and I'm just very appreciative that you would take an hour out of your, or a couple of hours out of your busy schedule and do this service for the constituents of the 37th District. Thank you very much, and I'll let you two close us out.
Thank you very much, Congressmember. It has been my pleasure. This is, I dream about student loan cancellation. Basically, I've been working towards this with various coalitions for a long time, so it's been my pleasure. What I would say as sort of closing remarks is to stay tuned to the news and to stay engaged. This is, as you mentioned, Congressmember, a political issue, and whether this ever happens again or whether there's other kinds of expansions, for example, the public service loan forgiveness waiver could be, expanded in time, like you could have more time to do that. That is a political issue. I think people should stay involved and, speak to their members and speak to the president about what they think on those issues, and stay in touch.
And I want to echo my thanks, Congressmember, and to your awesome team doing great work for the 37th Congressional District. I just want to pass on some advice to those still listening in. This is difficult work, but it's worth it. And so take the time to find out your eligibility for student loan debt relief, find out about public service loan forgiveness, and reach out to those resources that the Congress member will be having on her website, because we have to take advantage of this huge reform to higher education loan and financial aid. So this is just important work, and I appreciate to be a part of this conversation.
And I hope that both of you would be open to us calling on you again in the future. And once again, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone in the 37th Congressional District. Good evening.